Thank you so much. This is the first time I brought the Vikings so far north, and it's pretty exciting to see so many people interested in it. Like Jeremy said, my name is Megan Formanek. I am the author of action and adventure fiction set predominantly in 9th century Viking Trading Lands in through like Eastern Europe, which brings to life the dramatic adventures of Astrid, who is the main character of my books. And today, I guess you might be asking, why should I care about women's place in the Viking Age, and also what has that got to do with historical fiction? Well, as a historical fiction writer and a historian, it's kind of a basic principle of my job that I need to do research. So as I delved deeper into the Viking Age and the character of Astrid came to me, I realized that history had done women a little bit dirty, a lot dirty, really. And yeah, right, exactly. And history has often confined their contribution to the domestic sphere, while their menfolk are having grand adventures and becoming the heroes of an age. And perhaps we get a skerrick of notoriety in historical legends like Gladiator. But what lay between Homestead and Gladiator? And I think it's time that we shed some light on how nuanced a woman's life could be during the Viking Age and how technology is bringing that out of the ground. So this is technology that just as of a few weeks ago, I'm talking 3 weeks ago, has helped us understand women's contribution and how much their menfolk relied on their contribution. They couldn't have done what they did without them. And the strength of Viking Age men would not be looked at with any significance because it doesn't operate in a vacuum. They can't be strong without having someone to support them. And I think the natural place to start is with belief because it influences all parts of our society. And so I'm going to start with a reading from the number 1 book in the series where Astrid is speaking to her father. And he tells her, "You must make an oath to protect yourself, Astrid. In this life, you will need to use your instincts. There is a natural order, such as when a Jarl asks something of you, which, in return, you too will receive. This is life. But beware of those who are generous without demand. The time will come when they will call on a debt you have unwittingly accepted." So the passage I just read to you is what Astrid is told by her father at the beginning of the series. And like Astrid, her father has raised her to believe in the old gods of Odin, Thor, Frigg, and Balder, and many others. And she has learned that everyone has their fate woven for them by the Norns, those 3 female deities that sit at the base of the world tree, Yggdrasil. And as time goes on, Astrid questions the very basis of her belief and how that shapes the structure of her society. And when she thinks about the Norns, the 3 ladies named Uther for what has been, Vithrandi for what is occurring, and Skuld for what ought to happen, she believes she is destined for something greater than what her lot in life is at the beginning of the series. And it drives her to flee a second marriage and step into an adventure in a world unknown. Now, after a case of mistaken identity, Astrid embarks on a journey across the Baltic Sea to the settlement of Aldegiborg, which is now called Staria Ladiga. It's currently in Russia, and it is just south of the modern city of St. Petersburg. Now, this is one of the maps from my books, which is also on the table there, which I've used my primary school skills of tea staining and burning the edges to get some authenticity. Yeah, it's really fun. So all of those maps are in the books at some stage, and the maps do expand as she travels on. Now, when Astrid gets to Aldegiborg, she meets people from all throughout the trading world, and she develops her craft in the textile trade under the guidance of 2 mentors who are not at all what they first seem. And it's the oaths that she swears to these people that have unintended consequences, which is exactly what her father warned her of at the beginning of the series. But I would kind of argue what adult child actually listens to their parent and follows their advice. Probably not in your late teens, early 20s. So what follows is a series of events that leads Astrid to question all things. Her life is a tangle of languages, cultures, and beliefs that illuminate an expansive world, much larger than what she is raised in. And by the time we get to Serve the Worthy, which is the 3rd book in the series, she delves deeper into the trading route, right down to Kiev, which is like down here, and perhaps even further. Her crew aboard the Bobane, which is the name of the ship she travels on, includes a sphere merchant sailor, a Sami rudderman, and a spice merchant his father is of the Dublin Vikings and his mother was captured from the Gaelic kingdom of Gladiator. And it also includes a traveller from Baghdad who delights Astrid with tales of his famous city. And he describes his city like this. Shaped like a full moon, the river Tigris flows right by it, and from it, water flows via aqueducts to the houses and lush gardens within the city walls. Streets are kept clean and free of debris, and at night, lamps that cast pinpricks of light onto the stone paths illuminate the entire city. I squeezed my eyes tighter. Stone. That part always amazed me. Not the board paths I had sometimes encountered, not packed earth, and certainly not the dirt sludge that came after the downpour of rain. Ahmed, which is the trader's name, went on, "It is an important part of the world, with places for learning, for the care of the body, and at the very centre is the Golden Gate Palace and the Grand Mosque." His face always lit up when he explained the way the doorways arched, so I sat up and watched him as he recounted the paintings, the colours and the decorations in excruciating detail, only painful because I feared I would never see it for myself. So Ahmed then goes on to describe the famous library, the Khazanat al-Hikmah. And he gives Astrid one of her many nicknames, as Vikings are very famous for getting nicknames. He says, "One day they will call you the far-travelled." Now that name implies that Astrid will travel far distances, and for many, a woman, especially a woman in the Viking Age, does not really kind of fit in with that masculine idea that we have about the Viking raiders. Usually, Vikings and raiding go hand in hand. Most people would conjure some sort of image like this. Maybe not you, you all seem very learned here. But it kind of is in the name, Vikinger, somebody who goes abroad and engages in raiding activities, we shall say. It's the image of violent men intent on forging reputation through battle and pillaging the world of its wealth. It's kind of Ragnar and History Channel's Viking television show. I think that's it. Braids, tattoos, and leather-ish clothing. Now, we may imagine women's place in this to holding down the homestead while their male kin were off raiding the world. Sam's like, no. Now that we have kind of a starting point from this, I'd like you to keep your ideas about why you think women's place is what it is in the back of your mind. But I am interested to see what you all think women's place was. What is your idea of kind of early Viking Age, late 8th century, early 9th century? What were women doing? What was their contribution to the society? Does anyone have? Yeah?
I thought that women were a bit more allowed to be a bit more liberal in the Viking culture, like go raiding with the men. Like,
Okay.
I'm not sure, are shield maidens a real thing?
Yeah, okay. Well, we will talk about that. Yes. So where would you say that you get that image from? Is that from consuming like media, like television programs?
Well, I've read the Magnus Chase series, and while
Okay.
that's a little more on the mythology side,
Yep.
we're still talking about Valkyries and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we have representations of women, like women in battle with the Valkyries in the Norse mythology. Absolutely. Anybody else? Yep.
Say midwives.
Oh yeah, that's a really, yeah.
Caring for people. And then of course the oracles.
Yep.
And they would have been like they got powerful goddess figures. So
Exactly. Although that's kind of layered. I don't go into it in depth, but like one of their most powerful, being Freya, is actually not of the same class as the rest of the other gods, and she's kind of tricked into being there, poor thing. But yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. Anybody else have a starting point?
Sales.
Sales. Oh, you ruined the ending. That's right. Everyone ignore what she said. And she means that they sold things. No, it's fine. Yeah, we'll be getting into sales a little bit further on as well. Yes, okay. So as my Dark Ages professor used to say, let's jump into our time machine and let's get out. What can you see, hear and smell? So what I'm doing now is just passing around some wool. What I really would like you to do is have a good sniff. If you can't sniff it just from its up, like bury your face in there. So it's got quite a strong smell. So this smell is one that every Viking Age woman and many men would be like intimately familiar with. It's certainly one that Astrid is the main character of the Viking Trading Lands series experiences on the daily as a textile merchant who works predominantly with this stuff. The distinct aroma of lanolin hangs around on your hands, your hair, your skin, basically everything. And if you've ever had the misfortune of smelling burning wool, as Astrid does in book 3, it is not something you will ever forget. It's really, really strong. Has anyone ever smelt burning wool? Yeah, don't do it. Has everyone had a good smell? Yep.
Oh, that's strong.
It is strong, and that's been in storage for a while. So
What is this, the wool of?
that's the merino sheep. Yeah.
I reckon that smells better than the other one.
Yeah, I think so too. This one has been, I have been making fibre from it, so I've been touching it and diluting it a lot. But when it's freshly shorn before you kind of card it and do everything, it's a lot stronger. But I think, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't pass out, but it would be quite strong. Okay. So women were responsible for the textile needs of their family, which was a really onerous task. And as they would have been responsible for maybe not the shearing of the sheep, but certainly for the spinning and carding of the textiles. So this is a Viking Age drop spindle. And this is how you would have spun wool. I'm going to try not to drop it. It's been sitting in a box for a while. So take, for example, the garment that I'm wearing today and the one that I've got on my dolly. Each one of these dresses, so both layers of those would have taken about 2 meters of fabric. And in order to get the fabric, Astrid could not, or any Viking Age woman could not just go down to Spotlight and purchase fabric. She couldn't go down to Target or Kmart to buy a new dress. She would have had to either shear the wool and card it herself to remove all the vegetal matter, or she would have had to purchase it and then sort it out. Then she would have taken the roving, which is the tufty type of wool, and then layered it on the distaff like I have it here, which looks like cotton wool. Cotton candy. And then once she's done that, she would have had to spin it. Now, spinning it is like a very intense task, and I took this project on to understand how onerous this task really was, how long it would really take to do this. So she would have had to spin and spin and spin and spin and spin like this until she got skeins and skeins of the stuff. So we have this, so she would need a lot. And then, only then, could she have taken it to the standing loom, which is this one here, and woven those into fabric. And then she would have had to cut the pieces out and sew them by hand. This dress alone took me 50 hours to sew by hand, which I did for the Townsville Medieval Festival. And I'm not insane, although it was a really fun project. But yeah, I did it because I really wanted to understand what it took. And although it was very time consuming, it wasn't particularly difficult. And I actually found it a very calming and centering task, because I found that even though my hands were busy, I was able to talk to people, do other things, put things down, get up, and it was very calming and centering. And I think sometimes we're missing that kind of like busy handwork from our lives. We're so like crazy busy, I mean, yeah. So a garment like this or like this would have taken Astrid from start to finish approximately 3 hours. But then when you, 3 months. 3 months. So when, she was very fast. But then when you add into things like rearing children, food preparation, property maintenance, looking after the animals, it could have taken considerably longer. And not only did she have to clothe herself, she would have had to clothe all of the people in her longhouse. And as her family and the like new clothing requirements came about, she would have had to continue to produce that. So I think when you kind of understand the basic requirements of life, that every woman had to do this, you then start to see why it wasn't particularly attractive for women, and especially for a woman like Astrid. So much so that she gets on a boat and she flees to a land completely unknown. Nor does history actually support the assertion that all women stayed home to manage their properties alone. Men still needed clothes, and lovers and families wanted to stick together, as many still do when they work abroad or interstate. So in the Viking Trading Lands series, I use archaeological evidence, emerging thought, and papers discussing new developments in technology to help me tell Astrid's story. I begin from a place of probability. What you read within the pages of my books could have actually happened because it's supported by evidence. And while Astrid is required to spin and weave, she is not required to do so from home. One of the first people that Astrid meets in the Viking Trading Lands series is Neflorg, an enterprising woman. And she makes the following observations. Her green eyes were highlighted by the shade of her dress. She was all soft edges, nothing sharp, save for her mind, if the intellect I detected in her eyes would be anything to judge by. And it is here that we can begin to challenge our perception that women's place in the Viking Age was at home. And I want you to remember that history constantly changes, but the past never does. So what I mean by that is we need to shift our perception to get a better view. So we often are looking back with kind of like layered understanding of our own social structure and trying to apply that to what we find in the ground. So let's look at something I find really interesting. Now, a shrewd woman such as Neflorg might have run a large workshop like this. This is a 2021 discovery in the Northumbrian region of the United Kingdom. And what it's found is initially it was a 6x6 structure, but further excavations this year found that it's actually a 6x9 purpose-built textile workshop that has been in use since the late 7th century, which was Saxon period, but continued to be used by the great heathen army in the late 9th century. And what really gave it away was the amount of baked loom weights. So these are the clay discs that are used to weight these, and they have all different weights, so it will show you whether you're working with linen, wool, you're doing a coarser fabric, a lighter fabric, all sorts of things. And they found technical term gazillion there. So they know that it wasn't like a big long house and that it was used for many things. It was used for textile production. Yes, so this would have been comparable to the textile workshop that Astrid works in under Neflorg, a place that's full of life and friendship and provided them a much needed way of making money for women. Now, Astrid finds a lot of solace in this place, and sorry, I've lost my place. There it is. Wrong book. So Astrid finds a lot of solace in this place, and she describes it like this. Familiar sounds surrounded me like a comforting embrace. Women's chatter, the gentle hum of wool feeding through spindle notches, and the rhythmic clacking of shuttles moving back and forward on the loom. It was another busy day in the warehouse. Oh, we're still on this one. Okay, so most women did contribute to textile production. It was arguably, I argue it is. I would challenge anyone to contradict me that I think it's one of the most valuable skills of the Viking Age. Cloth was not only produced for clothing, it also sheltered people in the field in tents. It produced bandages to staunch wounds after wars. It dried bodies after a good scrub in a bathhouse. And it also powered the Viking ships that went across the ocean. So if you're not familiar with how Viking sails are made, they're made of wool, which was really surprising to me because I thought that would be super heavy and wool. But I mean, when you're thinking about it, what else would we use that they would have access to? So that's right, the women wove the sails that drove the dragon ships. They're huge multi-sectional pieces of wool, so they make them in sections and then they stitch them together. And just one sail was a monumental feat, requiring about 30 kilograms of wool from about 150 sheep and could take about 500 days to construct, depending on the size. So the size of the sail is proportionate to the length of the ship, but yeah, 500 days. So in fact, sails were so valuable that they often rivaled the actual ship building value. So how much it costs to build a ship, pretty much spending that again on a sail. Now, without women's contribution to sail construction, I would argue there couldn't have been a Viking Age of such expansion. They couldn't have gone as far. And I don't think history gives women their due in that we just look at the ships and they go, yeah, they were built by shipbuilders, but how were they being powered? Not only by manpower, but women power. So imagine then the fear if a sail was to rip on your journey and need urgent repair. It could be this valuable reparation skill that could save an entire crew from being stranded, as one of the characters in my book gets stranded for an entire year because he can't repair a sail and he can't afford to buy a new one. So with such a valuable skill, I don't think it's a stretch to say that women were almost everywhere that men were. And archaeological finds are supporting this. This is a site known as the Repton Channel. Some of you may be familiar with the Great Heathen Army that plagued Alfred the Great in the late 9th century? Yeah, for quite a few years. They really did invade. They took over a huge section of Northumbria. They took over all of Northumbria, and using a technology known as isotopic analysis, they were able to determine the origin of the skeletons. This technology looks at the chemical compound of food that's consumed in early life that remains in the body, the bones, and using this, historians have determined that 20% of the skeletons that are in this grave were females of Scandinavian origin. So that means that the women travelled with their men. They weren't from England. So in Astrid's world, she also knows that women travel with their men. And she reflects on this when she travels with the Druzina, which is the Viking Rus version of the kind of standing army. He did not insist I travel with the wives who followed their men, those who came to cook and clean and offer other services in the dark of night. So I rode in the middle file, next to the Druzina, who were awkward, astride their borrowed horses. The Druzina did not spurn me. Some of them had fought with women in the past, as rare as we were, and fewer still had witnessed their wives and daughters take up weapons when the need arose and understood well what women were capable of. Now, if women can follow armies, serve armies, and defend their goods, does it then follow that we can have legendary warriors such as Lagertha, getting to your question there? Now, Astrid is initially battle-hungry, although she certainly wouldn't consider herself a shield maiden, and we haven't found a lot of evidence in terms of shield maiden other than mythology. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but we have historical sources that does say that women did fight in the forces, but whether that was at the tail end, the beginning, they certainly weren't at the forefront. Some of her friends do refer to her as the Valkyrie of the field, but more as a talisman of fortune. When she does find herself thrust into battle, she's confronted by the chilling reality of it. I think as we all are, we think, yeah, this is going to be a great adventure, and you get there and you're like, So this is her thought here. Some might harden themselves with drink, but for me it was jarring that just 2 weeks before I'd been more concerned with making sails than killing a man. I hadn't sought it, and the thought that I'd previously desired the raid made me uncomfortable with the reality of fighting. It was necessary. I knew Aldegeborg had to be defended. But standing there in line, looking at the intoxicated faces smeared with the slaves' lifeblood, I knew that unlike those who thirsted for battle, I would never ache for it. The murderous members of our group were locked in a trance that only slaughter could slake. For them, this was not about trade, not about life, not about freedom. It was entirely for the joy of killing, and I hope never to be on the receiving end of that furor. So if women can follow, getting to, sorry, I got caught up there, a bit of excitement. This is one of my favourite bits. So I recall when the historical world was set abuzz by an archaeological development in Birka, one of the most significant Viking Age archaeological finds, a gravesite that was initially lauded as the pinnacle of elite warlords, a perfect illustration of the Viking Age warrior found in 1878. Back then, it was the prevalence of weapons and finery that gave this away. So you can see here in the picture, this is a sketch. We've got an axe, a sword, there's a sax in there, and also some arrow tips. And at the feet of the warrior, there are 2 horses which have been slaughtered for the purpose, along with various other finery and bridal gear. Bridal gear being, yeah, okay, good. Exactly, tack, thank you very much. It wasn't until 2014 and later that new developments in technology, principally the application of osteological evidence, looking at the bones, and DNA analysis, that historians discovered these remains belong to a female. Boom, yeah, exactly. So why did it take them so long? Well, for one, common practice is often when you open a grave, if there is weapons present, they determine it male, and if there are beads and brooches, female, unless presented with other evidence. Yeah, so is this problematic? Yeah, sure, but that's what they did. So yeah, and we're talking about 1878. They might not have access to technologies as we do, but thankfully we can rewrite the narrative there. So now we do have access to things like isotopic and DNA analysis, which cracked this particular code, but people will still come up with theories that she's the slave and that the master's been taken out of the thing, but she was dressed in silk, so, I mean, you know. So some 20 years after the discovery of the Burka warrior, the Oseberg ship, which is one of the best examples of a Viking ship burial, and for those who do not know what a ship burial is, it's basically when they drag a fully functioning ship or sometimes a purpose-built ship up onto land, dig a big hole, put it in there, then put the intended people inside and then bury it and build a big mound on top.
Is that like the burial of all the people who were on that ship?
No. So this particular one, this is like only reserved for upper echelons of society, usually kings. There are some ship burials in Estonia that have the crew, but that seems to be more like they all got killed, and as a marker of respect, the survivors dug a hole and put the remains in, but it's kind of less organized. This is very ritualistic, this site. So this actually belonged to 2 women. And it is one of the most complete and significant ship burials we have. It's currently on display in Norway. You can see it at the ship museum there. And 90% of what is on display is original. So it's pretty amazing. So unlike other graves, no one has ever said that this was anything other than basically a royal ship burial, and never argued that there were men inside. Well, not to my knowledge. There might have been some on the side. Common theories include that this belonged to the legendary Queen Ossa, who was the grandmother of the legendary Harald Finehair. She ruled in her own right and is one of the kind of, you know, only, I would say it's semi-mythological, but they quote it in history, right? So, and when it comes to the second body, however, the relationship between them is contended. The second body belonged to a woman who was about 20, 30 years younger. The older woman was around 75, the younger woman around 50-ish. But the isotopic analysis looking at the diet that this second woman ate and the scratches on her teeth from metal toothpicks showed she lived a very privileged life. So there are 2 competing thoughts, slave or not slave. But botched DNA analysis couldn't give us a relationship between them, whether it be familial or not.
What's your theory?
Well, my thought is, so a lot of people cite the fact that she had a big injury to the clavicle as being sacrifice, but more recent evidence shows that there was about 3 weeks of healing on that. So I don't think she was a slave slaughtered to go with her mistress. I think it was probably she succumbed to injury or to illness shortly after, and they were already interring this older lady, and this other lady might have been the person who ruled after her, albeit a very short period, and then they buried them. Because ship burials are not something you do in a week. They're something you do for months on end to prepare.
Could it be her daughter?
It could, but we will never know DNA-wise.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally plausible, but this is the problem, right? If only we could jump in the time machine to go back.
Was there a significant difference in what the 2 women were wearing?
No, I don't think that there was. I think the significance is that the older woman was, like, the prevailing theory is that she's Queen Ossa, so her goods are really nice. But when you look at ship burials and burial mounds, often when there's 2 bodies and you've got a slave, there's only grave goods for 1 person. But in this, there's grave goods for 2 people. So 2 people are being honoured rather than, yeah. So my thought is no, they are 2 significant people. The younger one is slightly less significant, but probably only because of her contribution to her society was not as long as the woman before. Interesting though. So I often do wonder what historians would think when they dug up Astrid, because she has weapons and she is revered for her skill with it, but she also has beads and brooches. So would they think she's a man? Probably not now, because they can actually test. So to think that women could hold and wield power shouldn't be a shocking revelation at all, because we have stories from like the sagas, right? We have heaps of stories about the Valkyries. Women who must deal with, frankly, horrendous situations and rise from the ashes. And this is Astrid's world, a world in which resilience is demanded, because if wisdom does not prevail, then she knew what the outcome would be. And I'm reading from my advanced copy of the book that's coming out at the end of the year. And if you sign up to my newsletter, you can get a free ebook copy at the end of the year when it comes out. So she would say, it would be a waste. I'd heard stories of women who bore long-held grudges, ones that would see their families on the path to blood feuds because of some slight that went on until their longhouses lay in smouldering ruins, leaving nothing but a smudge of their lineage on the landscape, all but forgotten. But I would not be one of them. So Astrid is determined to chart her course and shape her worth. And while discoveries made previously go some way to helping us challenge these views, it's what comes next that might entirely reshape it. So ground penetrating radar is a technology that was developed in the early 1900s. Basically what it does is it sends like a radio signal into the ground, and what comes back is a fuzzy picture of what's under there. It's predominantly used in looking at faults and voids under the ground, like under concrete, or determining thickness of structures. And it wasn't until the 70s when they started to use it for archaeological sites. And very recently it's found traces of more burial ships, mass graves, and artifacts without the need for shovel to hit dirt, which can be, when you expose things to the air, it can literally disintegrate. So they can do more testing before they get down there. And a lot of the burial ships, they exist in relief. What I mean by that is the outline of them exists in the soil, but once you dig them up, the wood is pretty much gone. So once it hits the air, you don't have anything. So if we can preserve these pictures, if we can preserve the pictures through ground penetrating radar, we get a really good idea of what's there before the need to go down and have a look. And then they can do soil testing. So a site in Klosterøy, Norway, which has already proven to be a historically significant site because of Iron Age finds, ground penetrating radar has shown that there's heaps of pit houses there, and it could be a thriving market of the time of Norway's first king. And across the North Sea in Denmark, they've just found, literally 3 weeks ago, the archaeological site just closed, 50 well-preserved skeletons. And I'm talking about entire skeletons in individual graves, not a mass pit. And one of those graves, the most significant, you've probably already read about this, is the woman who's buried in a wagon, showing that she is one of the most significant people in that society. So work has only just begun on that. Now it's all gone back to the site, and they'll be doing like lots of analysis, and then it will probably take 1 to 2 years for any papers to come out. But what my hope is for a greater understanding of burial ritual, female power, and family dynamics, because we have women and children graves. Children, it's like almost impossible to find children. Women, maybe less so. We missex the grave, but it's really exciting. Okay. So the women of the Viking Trading Lands series, just like the women of the Viking Age, were everywhere their menfolk were. They could live full lives, have adventures, and fewer still could travel to the far reaches of the world. Astrid's determination to explore her beliefs and forge her own destiny will see her navigate a more complex world than she ever imagined. So I invite you all to join her as she travels on her next adventure, where she rolls her shoulders before grasping the oars again. The skin had already broken on my palms, a discomfort that nudged me out of the long months of drudgery. I was back in the blazing sun, where its reflection on the river caused my face to leather and brown. Days of spinning, weaving, and axe practice were fine, but there was something about the crisp breeze and the sound of the water lapping against the ship's strake that made me feel free. Where will she end up? Perhaps only the Norns know. But to understand Astrid, I think we need to go back to the beginning, and that does not start with the wind in her hair. It starts with a decision. I had not wished for my husband's death, yet he lay before me, cold in our bed, covered in thick animal furs. His death would bring me what I desperately wanted for 2 years, escape. But for him, there would be no Valhalla, the desire of all men. There was no honour in dying in your sleep. Huddled on a low stool in the corner of the room, I sat watching my husband Audun's dark outline, knowing he would never again spring from our bed, as he did each morning before. I stared through the gloom and listened to the gentle whistle of the icy wind outside. My thin circa did little to keep me warm, and still I sat on that stool, with my feet tucked beneath me, thinking. Alone in the night, I could imagine the walls did not contain me. The wood of the structure and the earthen floor was still there, but my mind was free to remember my father, whose wisdom I required more at this moment than ever before. So today I've got books for sale, and you can grab a signed copy. And if you want to know more about the Viking Age science, if you want to know anything about Norse music, media, television, anything, books, I try to keep my finger on the pulse of everything. I have a newsletter called The Merchant Viking, and it goes out on the second Tuesday of every month. I don't bother you other than that, except for new releases. You can sign up here. It doesn't cost you anything. And you get a free ebook copy of my next release, which is the prequel to the first book at the end of the year. And I don't know if anyone reads Octavia Randolph, but I had her read this prequel and gave me a really lovely review that will be going on the yay author win. I saw you put it out on there. I was like, yes, Octavia. Yeah, she is honestly a lovely human being, just as you would expect. So thank you so much to Jeremy and to Douglas Libraries for having me today and organising this. And if you want to find out where I am next, there is information on the poster, but you can follow me on social media where I do Viking crafts, and my next thing is a Viking Age lantern that I'm doing. So please follow me there for what I'm up to next, and it's also up there. Thank you so much for coming.